Hi everyone and welcome to my art tutorial. My name is Rebecca and I have been drawing and painting for practically my whole life, and I recently started learning gouache and making these tutorials. They're so much fun and I'm so happy to share them with you. And each time I make a video, I'd like to think that I'm improving, and I'm always open to comments and feedback. So please like and comment and subscribe, and I will definitely take what you say into consideration as I move forward making these. So today I wanted to create a really autumnal feeling New England fall scene as we approach the end of summer. I don't know about you, but I am thinking of fall leaves changing colors. I'm thinking of hot chocolate and all of the fun holiday pumpkin themed things here in America. And again, I was just looking at some photos online for reference, and this little scene was what came up. So I would love to just start going over what I've used, and then we can get started. So I'm using 3 different brushes. I'm using a mop brush, a medium-sized brush, and then a small detail brush. I'm using gouache paints. I've included in my blog a photo of my paint setup, and I will include in the comments section or the info the types of paint I'm using and the brushes, just for your information if you're looking for a place to start. I'm using watercolor paper and painter's tape on top of a drawing board, and I just got this lovely ceramic palette on Amazon that I was excited about because I usually use plastic, and the ceramic ones are so much easier to clean. I highly recommend. And something about having fancy art supplies, intentional fancy art supplies, makes it all the more fun to create, I think. And I really recommend just not being afraid to upgrade once you feel a little more comfortable with what you're doing, and really making your art space and practice a sanctuary of quality and whatever you can afford, obviously, but I've just noticed that it motivates me even more. So let's get started. I have went ahead and got my drawing board and my piece of paper, rectangular shaped, horizontal. I've gotten it all ready and taped down, and by taping it on all 4 sides, you are going to come away with a lovely frame at the very end, and it just looks so neat and tidy and crisp and clean and satisfying. So I highly recommend you go ahead and make a little bit of extra time to block off all of the sides with tape. Here I am mixing up our sky, which is what we're going to begin with. A little bit of pure light aquamarine blue. I can't remember if it's aquamarine blue or not. I did put pictures of the colors I used all in this set. It is basically a light sky blue. And I just added enough water to make the paint glide across the paper. So I don't like to make the gouache too thick. I do like to dilute it a little bit with water so we get a natural blended look. I highly recommend doing that and not just applying it without water at all. Some people do that for a specific effect. But for this sky, we're just going to do a plain color for the sky and then really work about half of our canvas. We're going to cover that. I'm adding a little bit more to the tops of the slightly less diluted blue to make it just a little deeper, the top and sides. That's an important step, I believe. Personally, for your skies, you want to make the middle a little bit lighter and the top and sides just a touch deeper and darker. I have all the autumn colors out today. I am just mixing them up right now We have some brown and yellow, orange, gold, all those crispy leaves. I also highly recommend having a paper towel, a couple of paper towels, so you can remove some color if you need to, and also blot your brush. So you definitely want to make sure you can do that if you make a mistake. So now I'm going to start with the tree line, and this is in the distance of our painting. I mixed some white with some orangey brown, and it's supposed to look a little bit muted and faded. I'm just going across the horizon, and I'm doing straight up and down strokes to mimic trees, and going down a little bit on this page because we're going to do some blurry brownish trees, and then over top of it we're going to do some lovely yellow and gold trees. Our horizon is important because it gives us that depth and distance illusion that we want. I left a space kind of in the middle because there's going to be a large tree and a barn there, so we don't need to go all the way across. Here I am going in with some bright yellow. We're already adding some depth. This will be our leaves changing colors on the trees in this area, this landscape, leaving some of that brown still visible, but plenty of yellow. I'm actually going to go ahead and fill in a little bit more towards the middle of this yellow. So we're still going to be doing a barn on top of it, but you will see the trees sort of behind it, and I've noticed that the paint can go over top of it just fine. So a little bit of a change of plans. We are just going to fill in that horizon line all the way. Don't worry about gaps. Everything will be okay. Now we already have some blended autumn colors here for our basic tree line. Now I'm putting some green on my palette, mixing it with some yellow. And we are going to just start drawing grassy hills. So if you don't know where to start, I would say just copy what I'm doing. Do like a nice slanted hill. It's a good idea with landscapes to not do anything as just a straight across line unless the landscape specifically is supposed to look like that. This is just going to give an organic rolling hills sort of landscape. It'll give movement to the eye. You will see that too. So there will be like an area behind this rolling hill, and you'll be able to see just a slight difference in line behind it, filling all that in green right now. I left a little strip at the bottom bare. That's where I'm going to be doing a slightly darker color underneath it. That's where the shadows change a little bit. So I've noticed the grass at the very bottom just looked a little deeper. So those slight tonal variations in color are so important. So don't skip it if you can help it. They will show up and they will add this harmony that you can't even put your finger on whenever you look at it to say like, oh, that just really looks peaceful and lovely and real. So here we are, adding in that slightly deeper green at the bottom. Don't do it straight across. Think of like a wedge shape, and then I just brought it up a little bit on the other side, or maybe even like a bowl shape. My point is to make it kind of bumpy and not perfectly even and symmetrical. I added a little bit of water to my brush to clean it off. Now I'm putting some yellow on my palette. And on my brush, we want this to be a nice, pure, thicker yellow. So maybe just only add a little bit of water to that and then really go in with that medium-sized brush or your detail brush if you prefer and add some nice blobby leaves. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're just trying to mimic the shape of a tree that has lots of leaves on it, making sure that every tree looks just a little different, whether it's a little taller, a little wider, a little smaller, a little more plump with foliage, giving that uneven look, that non-homogeneous array of trees is going to be important to create the sense of a natural sort of randomized landscape. Now I'm doing pure orange, adding it to some of the trees, adding in blots and blobs of orange throughout to create a variation of both yellow and orange. And it adds a little bit of blending to that brownish background too, just a little. It still is there, but bringing that yellow in will just add even more interest visually. Now we're switching colors again. We're doing red for the barn. This part might be intimidating. Don't be too nervous. We can always fix it if you make a mistake. You could also lightly go over it in colored pencil first if that makes you feel more comfortable. I just dove right in, keeping perspective in mind. I started by making the barn not face directly towards us. I'm working on the small side of it I started with a rectangle on the side there and then a triangle for the area that is at the top near the roof. And it's going to be at an angle. I'm going to go straight down, make sure my vertical lines are very straight and my horizontal lines are not straight across. That is a good way to do your perspective. And a good lesson I learned in a drawing class, just remember to keep those vertical lines very straight and imagine your angle. So here's the side of the barn. I'm leaving a little bit of space on that smaller part of the building for a roof. Here we go. We're going to do a triangle shape right here. And then almost like a triangle mixed with a rectangle that's going to frame the roof for the other side part of this building. There's the front of the barn, leaving that space there again for the roof. And it's okay if those bottom lines of the building are a little uneven. There's hills and the land is not perfectly even, so it'll be okay. Just going to add another part to that triangle side of the building, make that vertical line going straight down. You could pick any barn if you didn't like this one too. And I'll include the reference photo that I used as well. I'll definitely put it on my blog so you can see what I was working from, if that helps. And then next to this barn is like a little outbuilding. So I'm adding in just a basic rectangle for that, getting all the bright red for that building out of the way at once so it has time to dry when we go back in. And it looks kind of weird right now, but just remember that we will be adding a roof. So it won't be quite so awkward. Just have to trust the process. And remember, we can always go back in and fix it. Now, let's see. I mixed a little bit of white with burnt umber, and emphasis on the white. I wanted to just make it like a color that stands out. And I'm working in the main tree of this painting, a nice big ancient tree that was probably planted there hundreds of years ago, and many families grew up under this tree, just loving it and watching it through the seasons. So there's a certain aura of romanticism attached to this tree, I think, starting with that kind of large stump. And don't extend it all the way to the bottom of the illustration. It's going to be kind of tucked into the hill closest to us, the darker green hill. And then some grass is kind of going to be growing up around the base of it. And then I added a little bit more burnt umber to the brush. And now we're working on branches. And the nice thing about this is I only followed my original reference picture loosely. I sort of freestyled this tree. A lot of these branches go off the page and they end somewhere off the page. We don't see where this tree ends. That's how gigantic it is. So we can really use our creative skills to just imagine where it goes. There's lots of room for exploration here. Just remember that tree branches are never perfectly straight. They taper in width. They get skinnier towards the edges. And you can always just make other branches sort of sprouting out of the larger ones. Don't be afraid to add crooks, like the crook of an elbow. That's kind of a popular shape I've seen on trees, and sort of like winding willowy branches. Lots of curves. And if you get a little too wild with it, just remember you can always add in some leaves or blot some of the color out. But if you do anywhere between 2 to 3 larger branches coming off of that main tree stump, and then adding small ones coming out of it, wherever it kind of looks and feels right, you really can't go wrong. And then pay attention to how I used a couple of different shades of brown here. So there's some very light brown, some very dark brown, there's some medium, cool brown. And I'm adding that final winding branch to come off of it. And it's okay if the color variation gets a little wacky. It adds a lot of visual interest, I think, in the end. And these tree branches kind of loop and curve around each other and they overlap. So don't be afraid to do that. I think that adds a lot of realism to it. I use my medium-sized brush for most of this, but you could really use your small detail brush. I'm actually switching up to that small detail brush now. And I'm going in with some darker brown. I've noticed it gets darker on the underside of the branches and lighter on the tops of them where the sun hits. So paying attention to that will add a lot of realism to what you're painting. I'm adding even more branches kind of curving around each other. It almost gives you that winding, twisting, not quite spooky, but mysterious tree look. It's like arms reaching out, asking for sunshine. Adding some dark shadows to the underside of those branches. It already looks pretty nice. Now I'm just creating a base for that tree, extending that a little more, making it look a little bit more defined. And I'll say one last thing about the tree before we move on. I think that taking a little bit of extra time to really make that look crisp, intentional, and pronounced will really help you be satisfied with your illustration, which is what I want. I want you to feel proud and good about the work that you've done. So don't forget to give that tree some love, because you might think that you want to put all your focus into the barn, but it's all about that tree for me. I just mixed some white with some blue, very light. Here, it's almost like a bluish gray white. And I am starting in with this curved roof. It is definitely a curved shape. And the barn shell should have been mostly dry by now. The layer we put on it was not too heavy. And the roof might still look a little bit sheer. That's okay. We can go back over it again once that layer dries. Make sure to extend the roof down to the other side and match the sharp triangle line. And even mine isn't perfect, so just remember it doesn't have to be perfect. Just nice enough to where you know what it is and you recognize its purpose there. Not perfectly symmetrical. I didn't measure anything. And sometimes that's the best way to have a relaxing painting session. So now I'm going in with some pure white, and I am doing the roof of that outbuilding and then tracing it and extending it to the very edge of that paper. 1, 2, 3. That's going to be the fence. So there's going to be these 3 straight lines that will represent the fence that's built to keep in the animals that have once lived there. And then going upwards with some vertical lines to show that that is indeed a fence. The more clues we add, the better, without getting too detailed. Here I was just going in for a second and adding a line or two to the horizon. You don't have to do that. And then I added those 2 lines to the side of the outbuilding. There's a set of doors on the side of this barn. So I'm just adding in 2 little rectangles on the sides with that white paint. I think I'm exclusively just using white on the roof now. It seemed to work better than trying to do the blue-gray. Just keep it light for contrast reasons. That's all I will say. And here's the roof for the other section. And it's going to be bumping into those branches a little bit. So what I'll do is just take priority for the roof and then go back in with some brown and repaint the branches over top of it later. And when we're working with perspective, it's not a perfect rectangle. It's kind of like this angle. You're sort of doing like a diamond shape. I'd love to make a perspective video if anybody's interested to talk more about that, or there's plenty of other wonderful YouTube videos to talk about perspective. But for now, if you just follow what you see, working in those almost diamond-shaped rectangles at an angle for the roofs, you will see that it really does look real, like the real thing. And then going in on the other side of that triangle, just marking in where some windows will be. And you want to keep the white. It's actually a good idea to have the white there because it almost captures a little bit of a glimmer of the glass we'll go back in with black. I almost did like a angle shape for some of the windows down there. It's already looking pretty good, pretty barn-like. So I'll leave that alone to dry for now. Go back in on the tree a little bit, adding some chalky white to the bark. Adding visual interest and texture. Adding some white to the top of those branches where the sun is going to come on in and shine its light down. Tracing it up through. Going back over in a darker brown over that roof that I covered up before. That little detail brush is such a lifesaver. So useful. Now I'm adding some stripes up the side of the thickest part of the tree to show where the bark has texture. Very important step if you want a beautiful tree. I waved to someone outside who was watching me paint. If you saw that little wave in there. I paint at my window, so sometimes I see people. Then I'm just going back up on the sides, adding some color variation, shadow. I always try to have 3 main colors for something like this, like a very dark for the darkest shadows, a medium for the midtones, and then you have the lightest color, which is that light brown for the highlights. And then inevitably you'll get some colors in between as you kind of blend them. Now I'm going back in with like a brownish color, medium brown, and adding in lines, vertical and also branches to some of the trees in the background to make them look like they're losing their leaves, to give you even more clues as to what time of year it is. It's not like you needed it, but it adds a little something to the horizon to just see some branches kind of poking through and up out of the golden yellow colors. Maybe adding just a couple of bare trees back there. Some who have lost their hair already. And with landscapes, it's just lovely because you can really tap into your intuition and just feel what it needs. Sometimes you look at it and you just say like, oh, it could use a little here, not there. Sometimes your body can really tell you when to stop, especially the more you do paintings like this, the more you learn what visually looks like enough or too much. It's easy to get carried away, and also it's easy to be timid and not do enough. So finding that balance is challenging, but so important and integral to our growth as artists. Going in with that very, very tiny detail brush and just detailing some of the leaves, some of the branches, keeping it a little bit vague. A little bit of mystery is important. Now there's a smaller tree next to this large queen tree that has lighter branches. It's shorter to the ground. It's like a sister tree, very different. And I'm just using that almost pure white, it's like whitish brown, to extend those branches up. And we'll add leaves later. It's kind of back behind this tree, so it will look smaller because it is further in the distance. Again, I'm just taking some of that extra color and putting some whitish brown back in the tree line. Because there is a vibrancy, but also a dullness in fall foliage as the leaves dry out. So it sounds weird to say, like, oh, make your painting more dull, but sometimes we need to add touches of both vibrancy and muted colors to pull something together. Just like how it's important to use both warm and cool colors in our illustrations or our paintings sometimes to create a balance. Okay, looking good. Going back in to the roof, making it a little bit more opaque, smoothing out some of those lines. Sharpening some of those edges. I think that's an important thing for doing buildings too, is working on getting not too shaky edges and lines. Practicing making those long straight lines will help sharpen it up. I'm adding just a little bit more of like a light yellowy green to the hill closest in front of the house. I noticed there's kind of like a band of sunlight touching it. You can kind of trace it back further along the trees too, making it defined where there are some hills and spaces where there is light. What I'm doing here is just adding some light to this area where we're going to paint a shadow of this big giant tree. And if you notice how sun filters through the leaves of a tree onto the ground, that's kind of the pattern I'm setting this up for. Blots. Now I'm doing some gold. This will be where the leaves have fallen on the ground, so I'm just starting to add some of those in. Some in the background too. These leaves are just everywhere. But I would be mindful about not covering the ground in them completely, just doing patches, leaving patches of grass where there are no leaves at all, so we can really see the haphazard fashion in which they fall. Now I'm just doing some yellowish orange, just some like vertical grass-like shapes. So these will be little leaves crumpled and resting on the ground, and also some yellowish grass as well. I took some whitish yellow. I noticed that there's quite a few different colors in the leaves that had fallen on the ground, so I'm just blotting them in with the small detail brush. Some are vertical stripes, some are more like crumpled balls, kind of like crumpled balls of paper. That's what the leaves look like. They weren't quite like a stretched out leaf shape. Adding in some light areas to the grass back there. Really observing the shadows and highlights and then replicating them is a really good strategy for a painting you end up happy with. I was reading somewhere that it's better to look at the reference painting, in this case, what I'm doing, more than your own painting whenever you attempt something like this. And that just means don't over scrutinize your work. Really try and see the lines and patterns and replicate them and really, really look hard at whatever you're trying to copy. And you will likely be much more satisfied with your work. Here I am with a dark olive green. I added some black to the green that we've been using, and I'm blotting a shadow in. And I'm dragging some of the shapes out, but also not completely filling it in. I'm leaving lots of space where you see that yellowish sunlight filtering through the leaves coming through. And in that shadow, I'm trying to trace the shape of the tree almost. It's like stretched out. These stripes were in the original reference photo, they're just shadows. So I tried to copy those. And the tree shadow actually kind of extends beyond what we can see in the painting. I'm just adding a little bit of brighter green to this because the way that the sun and shadows play together creates a couple of different colors here. Now I'm adding some leaves to the smaller tree in the background, just copying that stippling effect, that blotting effect to create the leaves. Make some a little higher, some a little lower. We're trying to make it look as natural as we can. A couple different colors. Let it be a gradient. I took some darker green. I'm adding it sort of in the background there to make the leaves stand out and pop a little bit more. I noticed they were blending into the hill behind it. Adding some darker green to the ground, but almost in that hill shape, showing the shadow where the leaves on the tree hit the ground. In this corner, it looks like it got a little darker, so I'm just adding some more to that. A little bit more leaves, a little more darkness to them. Now I'm starting to add some yellow leaves, some yellowish gold leaves to our large tree here, using that medium brush to add large volumes of them, large clumps. We want it to look like there are kind of a lot of leaves here. And there's no real rule for where to put them. Leave some of the branches visible though. Don't cover them too much, but you can overlap some of them in some areas. So the line is broken, but you still kind of see that there's a branch. And gouache is nice and thick, so it's sometimes easier to cover things than you realize. Some of these leaves go in between. You still want to have some sky showing behind them. Now I'm going in with some brighter yellow, kind of just randomly adding it, but not completely covering that first color we added. I like to just do it in clusters, sort of like on top. That's where the sun will be shining and hitting the tree, so you want that yellow to reflect that. And then the darker colors, we'll try and add them towards the underneath of the leaves if we can, which is where the shadows will be. But then sometimes there's shadows on top if there's other leaves and branches above them. So whenever I was looking at this photo, I realized there was just some shadow all around and then some lighter patches. So I'm going in with some orange, some darker orange, and just emulating that. Doing like U shapes around the outline of the leaf clusters is kind of a good strategy that was working for me, and then randomly adding in just a line, a haphazard scattered line here and there, tracing the shape of each cluster of leaves with the darker color, and especially going underneath and sometimes in between them, making sure you leave a good amount of that lighter color in the center and top. Now I'm going in with a slightly blended orange yellow, adding a few more bulky areas to the leaves, splashing in some of that color gradation, and now it's looking very fall, isn't it? It's nice. And you can use your tiny detail brush too. I'm using my medium-sized brush, but the detail one might work even better if you're looking for tiny leaves, especially this step. I'm just dotting in some crumpled fallen leaves that have come off of our tree. And we're going to just cover the ground, but it's not going to extend in the area where the shadow is too much. The fallen leaves will mostly be in this darker area down here, closest to us. And I'm using a few different colors. So I use that dark orangey red. I'm using the orange. I'll use the orangey yellow, just randomly scattering the colors throughout, but not covering every inch of it. Just leave some patches of grass in between so they look like they've fallen naturally and not just in one even pattern. I noticed there was some white as well, maybe some like whitish orange going in there, adding that depth of color. Now I'm taking some very dark brown and adding the shadow underneath the roof. There's like a triangle shape at the top right there that I added. Adding darkness to the windows to make them into little squares. Definitely don't skip the shadow underneath the roof to the side of the barn. Filling in this area right here where the outhouse has like a caved in area, like a storage space. Adding a little bit of shadow to the fence. Using that tiny detail brush will help you be more confident in your line making skills, but just make sure to go underneath and make that like triangle shape up to a point there. Then just go ahead and do the same thing. There's a little bit of shadow. I'm also working in on that smaller side building. And finally, some darker red to indicate the shadow. There's like slight shadow being cast from the side. So having some variations in the color of red and orange on the barn is a nice touch. Here I kind of played with the idea of doing some stripes on the side, but I eventually ended up blending it in because I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. You could try, maybe it'll work better for you. And then finally, I added some darker red leaves to our tree to kind of finish it off. Just dabbling that in there to show shadow and depth. Extending my tree shadow out a little bit more. Retracing those lines in the leaves. Adding in any finishing touches, maybe some bold, bright yellow highlights of the tree to show where the sun has come in, and anything else you think it needs. But I think it's looking pretty good. I hope you feel the same way about yours. And now all that's left is we're going to let it dry for a little bit, and then whenever it is sufficiently dry, let's go to the next step where we take the tape off of each side and look at our finished, beautiful work of art. I hope you are satisfied and this tutorial taught you something new and it was easy and relaxing to follow. That is my aim and intention. If you have any tips or pointers for me of how I could improve to better serve your learning journey, I would be very happy to hear them. And if you have any ideas of other things you would like to see me paint, please drop it in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed this tutorial. I really appreciate your support, and I will be posting a little bit more details and photos on my blog, which the link is in the bio of this video. So I just want to wish you all a good rest of your day, and thank you for painting with me.